I was never meant to tell this story out loud. It was written down, locked away, stamped with dates that didn't make sense anymore. It was supposed to stay in a drawer in the sheriff's office of Stillwater County, Minnesota, under a stack of old incident reports and faded maps of lakes that no longer look the same to me. But the problem with writing something down is that it keeps existing, even when you try to forget it. If you're hearing this, then someone found the record. Or maybe I finally decided to stop pretending I could carry it alone. I want you to understand something before we go any further. I've been sheriff here for a long time. Long enough to know the ice. Long enough to know which lakes groan in February and which ones stay quiet. Long enough to know when a man walks into winter because he wants to disappear. This wasn't that. The footprints were the first thing I saw. Clean. Even. Calm. One set. Leading from the tree line straight out onto the frozen lake. No wandering. No hesitation. No return. People don't walk into a frozen lake by accident. They test the ice. They turn back. They panic. These prints didn't, and that's where it started. Before I go on, let me say this. If stories like this keep you up at night, if you're the kind of person who listens all the way through even when your instincts tell you to stop, make sure you're subscribed. These accounts don't come with warnings, and you don't want to miss the parts people usually refuse to finish. And tell me something while you're here. Where are you watching this from right now? A bedroom with the lights off. A car parked somewhere quiet. A phone held too close to your face in the middle of the night. Leave it in the comments. It matters more than you think. Stillwater County is quiet in winter, the kind of quiet that presses in on your ears until you start hearing things that aren't there. Snow smooths everything down. Roads. Fences. Memories. Out here, silence doesn't feel empty. It feels full, like something holding its breath. The lake sits just north of town. Locals don't call it by its official name anymore. They haven't for years. Maps still use it. The county records too, but the people who live here call it something else. Or they don't call it anything at all. That morning, the sky was low and gray. The kind of sky that makes distances lie. The kind that flattens the world until everything feels closer than it should be. I remember standing at the edge of the ice, looking at those footprints, and thinking how ordinary they looked. Like they belonged there. Not real. Real. Not real. I remember saying that to myself without realizing it. A habit I didn't know I'd formed. The prints went straight out toward the center, each step evenly spaced. Heel to toe. No drag marks. No breaks where someone paused to listen to the ice. I followed them with my eyes until the snow glare swallowed them up. There were no tracks coming back. Search and rescue protocol says you mark the last known point. You radio it in. You wait for backup. I did all of that. By the book. That's what I tell myself anyway. The truth is, I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. The ice should have been scarred. Windswept. Cracked. It wasn't. It looked untouched except for that single path of footprints. Like the lake had been waiting for them. Like it had prepared a place. I took a step closer and felt that familiar resistance under my boots. Solid. Safe. The kind of ice we drive trucks over every winter. I'd walked this lake more times than I could count. I knew its moods, its sounds, its warnings. It gave me none. I remember thinking about all the cases that never quite close. The ones that sit in your mind long after paperwork says they're done. Missing hunters. Ice fishermen who don't come home. People who leave cars running at trailheads and are never seen again. We tell ourselves stories to make those cases survivable. Accidents. Poor decisions. Bad weather. This didn't fit any of them. The footprints weren't rushed. They weren't afraid. Whoever made them wasn't running from something behind them. They were going towards something. I looked back at the tree line, half expecting to see another set of tracks. Someone following. Someone watching. There was nothing. Just snow and bare branches and that heavy winter stillness that makes you feel like you're being observed by the land itself. That's when I noticed something I didn't write in the official report. Halfway out, the footprints changed. Not the shape, not the size, the intent. I don't have a better word for it. The spacing shifted just slightly. Like the person walking had adjusted their stride, like they'd realized something and kept going anyway. Not real. Real. Not real. I told myself it was nothing. Snowdrift. Light. Perspective. I told myself a lot of things that morning. I stepped onto the ice. I shouldn't have. I know that now. But I did. Every instinct I developed over decades told me I was safe. The ice didn't creak, didn't complain. It accepted my weight like it always had. I followed the footprints a few steps in, just far enough to feel the lake surround me on all sides. That was when the quiet deepened. It's hard to explain. Winter is already quiet. This was something else. Like the absence of sound had layers. Like I'd stepped into a pocket where the world had been turned down too low. I stopped walking. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. Then I saw it. The footprints ahead of me looked sharper than the ones behind. Fresher. I turned around. My own prints were already softening. Edges blurring, filling in with fine frost like they'd been there longer than they had any right to be. I stood there, heart steady, breath controlled, telling myself this was just how snow behaved. Not real. Real. Not real. I went back to shore. I didn't run. I didn't look behind me. When my boots hit land again, the world returned to normal. Wind, distance, sound. And when I looked back, the footprints were gone. All of them. That's when I understood something I still haven't written down anywhere official. The lake didn't break. It didn't crack. It didn't take anyone by force. It opened. And it noticed me noticing it. I don't know how long I stood there after that. Minutes. Hours. Time behaves strangely around things you don't want to believe. Eventually, I turned back toward town. Toward the office. Toward paperwork and radios and familiar walls. I told myself I'd come back with a team. With witnesses. With daylight and noise and rules. I told myself this was just the beginning of an investigation. I didn't yet understand it was the beginning of a confession. The official report says I returned to the office at 09:17 and logged the call as a possible missing person incident pending identification. It says I contacted search and rescue, notified county administration, and marked the lake as a restricted area until further notice. It says I followed procedure. What it doesn't say is how long I sat in my truck before turning the key. Stillwater County looks different when you've seen something that doesn't fit. Roads feel narrower. Trees feel closer. The town feels like a place pretending to be what it used to be. I drove back slowly, watching the rearview mirror more than the road ahead, half expecting to see a line of footprints forming behind me in the snow. There were none. The office was warm in that dry institutional way. Old coffee, paper. Heat struggling against winter. I hung my coat on the same hook I always used and stood there longer than necessary, staring at the wall where a faded county map hung crooked. Lakes everywhere, blue shapes scattered like fingerprints. I tried not to look at the one north of town. Not real. Real. Not real. I told myself to focus on work. That's how you survive this job. You don't let your mind wander. You don't let patterns form where they shouldn't. You treat every incident like it's explainable, even when it isn't yet. I pulled the records. Missing persons within a 20-mile radius. Winter cases. Unresolved. There were more than I remembered. Names I recognized. Names I didn't. Dates stretching back farther than my tenure. Every few years, sometimes closer together, sometimes spaced out just enough that no one noticed the rhythm. I noticed the locations. Always near water. Lakes. Rivers. Frozen wetlands that don't look dangerous until they are. Most reports mentioned thin ice. Alcohol. Weather conditions. Plausible explanations. Comforting ones. But a few files stood out. Footprints leading onto ice. No return tracks. No breakage. No body. Those reports were shorter. Less detail. Fewer follow-ups. Like whoever wrote them didn't want to linger. Like they'd already decided not to look too closely. I flipped through one dated 17 years back. Different sheriff. Different handwriting. Same lake. The description was almost identical to what I'd seen that morning. Calm prints. Even spacing. Straight line. The report ended with a single sentence I couldn't stop rereading. Subject presumed lost to elements. No mention of ice failure. No mention of evidence beyond the tracks. Just that quiet final assumption. I felt something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with cold. I checked the margins. No notes. No red flags. The case was closed within 3 days. I told myself that was normal. Resources are limited. Winter doesn't wait. Families want answers, even simple ones. Sometimes you give them what you can. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the file was incomplete in a way that went beyond missing paperwork. By noon, word had spread. It always does. A fisherman called asking if he should stay off the ice. A reporter left a message that I didn't return. Someone from the county board asked if this was going to turn into a problem. I said no. I said it was under control. I said a lot of things that weren't lies exactly, but weren't the truth either. That afternoon, I drove back to the lake with 2 deputies and a volunteer from search and rescue. Bright jackets. Radios. Noise. The kind of presence that usually makes places behave. The snow had shifted since morning. Wind had moved across the surface, softening edges, filling shallow impressions. I told myself that explained everything. We spread out along the tree line. We scanned the ice. We marked the shoreline. There were no footprints. Not even the place where they'd begun. One of the deputies asked me where exactly I'd seen them. I pointed. He nodded. Polite but unconvinced. Like you do when your superior says something that doesn't line up with what's in front of you. Search and rescue ran their equipment. Ice thickness readings came back solid. Too solid. Safer than most years. No one said it out loud, but I could feel the question hanging there. If someone had gone in, where was the break? We did a sweep anyway. Hours of slow movement and controlled breathing and pretending this was routine. The sun dipped low. The light flattened again. The lake stayed quiet. When we called it for the day, there was relief in everyone's posture except mine. Back at the office, I added notes to the report. Neutral language. Observations without interpretation. I left out the part about the footprints changing. I left out the way the quiet had deepened when I stepped onto the ice. I told myself those details didn't belong in an official record. That night, I took the long way home. Past streets I'd patrolled for years. Past houses with windows glowing warm against the dark. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Like a stage set. At home, I unlocked the door and paused, listening. Nothing. I went inside. Boots off. Lights on. Habitual motions grounding me. I stood at the kitchen sink and let the water run, watching steam rise. reminding myself of heat and solidity and weight. When I turned around, I noticed the floor. A thin line of moisture stretched from the doorway toward the hall. Not puddles, not drips, footprints. They were faint, already fading. Just impressions where something wet had briefly touched wood. They stopped halfway down the hall. I stood there longer than I care to admit, telling myself this was impossible. Snow tracked in earlier. Boots melting. Condensation. Anything but what it looked like. Not real. Real. Not real. I wiped them up with a towel. The wood beneath was dry, warm, ordinary. I told myself I was tired, that the day had stretched my nerves thinner than I realized. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was shallow and fractured. I dreamed of walking across ice that reflected the sky perfectly, so that up and down didn't matter anymore. I dreamed of following footprints that were already waiting for me. I woke before dawn with the sense that something had been listening. The next morning, there was frost on the inside of my bedroom window. That shouldn't happen. I stood there, breathing slow, watching the pattern creep outward like it was searching for a shape. When the sun finally rose, it melted away, leaving nothing behind. No evidence, no proof, just another thing I couldn't write down. At the office, a voicemail waited. No number. Just static at first. Then breathing. Slow. Familiar, almost like my own. I deleted it without listening to the end. I told myself I was still in control. I told myself this was just another case. I told myself the lake was just a lake. Not real. Real. Not real. I went back to the lake alone. I didn't log it. I didn't tell anyone. I justified it the way people in my line of work always do, by calling it a quick follow-up, a personal verification. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. I needed to see it again, without witnesses. I needed to know if what I'd felt that morning had been real, or if my mind had already started filling in spaces that should have stayed empty. The road north was empty. Snowbanks pressed close on both sides, narrowing the world into a single pale corridor. The radio hummed quietly, more static than music. I turned it off before I reached the turnoff, preferring the sound of tires on packed snow. The lake looked the same as before. That bothered me more than if it hadn't. Same low sky. Same smooth, uninterrupted surface. No markers. No tape. No sign that anything unusual had happened there at all. If I hadn't been standing there less than 24 hours earlier, I would have believed nothing ever did. I stood at the tree line and waited. I don't know what I was waiting for. A sound. A feeling. Some signal that I wasn't alone. The wind moved across the ice in shallow ripples, raising thin veils of snow that slid and settled again. The lake breathed, slow and patient. I stepped closer, careful this time, watching my boots sink slightly into the snow at the edge. I looked down and felt a strange, irrational relief when I saw my own footprints forming behind me. Solid, immediate, proof of presence, not real, real, not real. I walked out farther than I meant to, 10 steps, 20, the ice held. It always did. I told myself that's all this was. An overreaction layered on a familiar place. Then I heard it. Not a crack, not a groan, a sound like someone shifting their weight. I stopped. The sound stopped too. I waited, breath slow, ears straining. The silence pressed in again, deeper than before. Like the air itself was listening back. I became aware of my own heartbeat, heavy and loud, echoing in my skull. I took another step. The sound came again, directly beneath me. I knelt, pressing a gloved hand to the ice. It was cold enough to burn, solid, unbroken. Nothing moved beneath the surface, but the sensation of contact sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with temperature. I stood up too quickly, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. No one around. No witnesses. Just me and the lake, and a stretch of ice that no longer felt like a surface so much as a boundary. I told myself to leave. Instead, I followed the memory of where the footprints had been. Halfway out, the light changed. The sky didn't move, but the color drained subtly, like contrast being turned down. The horizon blurred. The far shore felt farther away than it should have been. That's when I saw them. A single set of footprints, forming ahead of me in the snow. Not appearing. Not emerging. Waiting. They started where the lake had been empty moments before. Crisp edges. Perfect spacing. Facing away from me, toward the center. I didn't move. I counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. I told myself this was a trick of light, old impressions resurfacing, wind sculpting snow into familiar shapes. But they were wrong in a way that made my stomach tighten. They were my size. Same length, same tread pattern. I took a step back. The footprints didn't change. I turned toward shore. The distance felt longer now, stretched, like the lake had subtly expanded while I wasn't watching. The tree line looked thinner, less solid. I could still see my own tracks leading back, but they already seemed faded, less certain than the ones ahead. Not real. Real. Not real. I forced myself to walk back, one step at a time, refusing to run. Running would mean admitting fear. Running would mean losing control. Behind me, the footprints remained. They didn't follow. They didn't need to. Back on land, the world snapped into place again. Wind picked up. Sound returned. The lake looked inert, harmless. Just another stretch of frozen water under a winter sky. I turned once more before leaving. The footprints were gone. At the office, I told no one. I filed no update. I went through the rest of the day on autopilot, answering calls, signing forms, pretending my thoughts weren't drifting north every few minutes. That evening, I started asking questions. Quiet ones. I stopped by the hardware store and mentioned the lake in passing. The clerk's expression tightened just a little too quickly. He said the ice was good this year. Said people should be careful anyway. He didn't meet my eyes. At the diner, I asked an older man at the counter if he remembered anyone going missing out there years back. He stirred his coffee longer than necessary before answering. Said winter takes things. Said some places don't like to give them back. He used a word I hadn't heard in years. An old name. Not on any map. He didn't explain it. That night, the radio in my kitchen turned on by itself. Just static at first. Then a faint, rhythmic sound underneath it. Too regular to be interference. Too soft to be mechanical. Footsteps. I stood there, frozen, listening as they slowed, then stopped. As if whoever was making them had reached the edge of something. The radio clicked off. In the silence that followed, I realized I could hear the lake. Not from outside. From inside my head. Not real. Real. Not real. I slept in the living room with the lights on. Sometime before dawn, I dreamed I was standing on the ice again, watching a man walk away from me. He never turned around. He never fell through. He simply kept going until he blended into the horizon. When I woke, my boots were wet. They were standing by the door, exactly where I'd left them. I hadn't gone outside. I stopped trusting mornings. That's the first thing that changed, though it took me a while to admit it. Daylight used to mean clarity, shift change, coffee, paperwork, things lining up the way they were supposed to. After the lake, mornings felt like a lie the world told itself so it wouldn't have to remember the dark. I checked my boots again before leaving the house. Dry. Cold. Normal. I pressed my thumb into the leather near the sole, half expecting it to give, to weep meltwater like it had no right to be dry at all. It didn't. That unsettled me more than if it had. The drive to the office felt longer than usual. Same roads, same turns. Different weight in the air. I kept glancing north without meaning to, like a compass needle stuck on a false direction. At my desk, I listened to the radio logs from the previous night. Nothing flagged. No calls near the lake. No reports of trespassing or noise complaints. Just routine chatter and long stretches of silence broken by static. I rewound one of them. In the background, beneath the hiss, there was something else. A faint, steady rhythm. Too slow for wind. Too deliberate for interference. I turned the volume up, then down, then back up again. Footsteps. When I paused the recording, they stopped. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, counting the stains in the tiles. I told myself this was stress, sleep deprivation, the mind filling quiet with meaning. I'd seen it happen to other deputies, to witnesses, to families waiting too long for answers. I'd never seen it happen to me. Not real. Real. Not real. I pulled more files. Not just missing persons this time. Incident reports. Noise complaints. Calls that had gone nowhere. Anything that mentioned the lake, even indirectly. There were patterns hiding in the margins. A deputy noting unusual quiet. A caller hanging up without speaking. Reports of radios losing signal in clear weather. One report caught my attention, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. It was filed by a deputy who'd retired before I took office. The location was the lake. The time was just after midnight. The description was a single line. Heard movement on ice. No visual confirmation. Area clear. No follow-up. No explanation. I tracked him down that afternoon. He lived just outside town now, in a small house that backed up against trees. He looked older than I expected. Smaller. Like something had been slowly folding him in on himself. When I mentioned the lake, he didn't ask why I was there. He just nodded. Still happening then, he said. I asked him what he meant. He shook his head, stared past me toward the tree line. You don't hear it with your ears, he said. That's the mistake. You hear it with the part of you that remembers where you've walked. I asked him to be specific. He smiled, thin and tired. Everyone hears it differently, he said. Some folks hear footsteps. Some hear their name. Some just feel pulled. Pulled where? I asked. He didn't answer that. He told me about the old name for the lake. The one people don't use anymore. Said it translated poorly, but the closest meaning was something like the place where paths end. Or begin again. Depending on who was telling the story. Folklore, he called it. Something passed down by people who didn't write things down. People who learned which places to avoid by losing someone first. I asked him why he'd never put that in a report. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Like he was measuring how far gone I already was. Because writing it down makes it listen harder, he said. On the drive back, my radio crackled once. Just once. A sound like someone shifting their weight on packed snow. I turned it off and drove the rest of the way in silence. That night, I dreamed of maps. Old ones. Hand-drawn. Lakes sketched in ink that had bled with time. Footpaths crisscrossing the land. Some bold and dark. Others faded nearly to nothing. All of them led north. All of them ended at the same blue shape. I woke with the word not real on my lips. I didn't go back to the lake the next day. Or the day after. I told myself distance was a form of control. That if I focused on other work, other cases, this one would settle back into place. Instead, it followed me. In reflections, in windows. In the way hallways at the office seemed longer at night. I'd catch myself listening for a sound that wasn't there, then realizing I'd been listening for a long time. The radio logs kept changing. I know how that sounds. I checked the timestamps. I compared copies. They didn't change in obvious ways. just small shifts. A pause that hadn't been there before, a breath layered under static. A phrase cut off half a second earlier than I remembered. Once, I heard my own voice. It was quiet, strained, saying something I hadn't said yet. I shut the system down and sat in the dark office, lit only by the glow of emergency exit signs. For the first time since this began, I considered the possibility that the lake wasn't just a place. It was a process, a kind of slow erasure that reused what it took. Not real, not real. The call came just before midnight. No number, no voice, just the sound of ice under pressure. A low, resonant hum that vibrated through the receiver and into my bones. I listened until my hand went numb, until the sound faded on its own. When I hung up, my reflection in the darkened window looked wrong. Not distorted, just slightly delayed. Like it was waiting for me to do something first. Outside, snow had started falling. Thick, steady, erasing tracks almost as soon as they formed. I knew then that whatever this was, it wasn't finished with me. And I had the sinking certainty that it had been waiting much longer than I had. The snow didn't stop. It fell through the night and into the morning, thick enough to blur the edges of everything it touched. Cars looked abandoned. Streets lost their lines. The world simplified itself into white and gray, and whatever thoughts you brought with you. By the time I reached the office, there were already messages waiting. Not emergency calls, not reports, just questions. People asking if the lake was closed, if it was safe, if there was something going around they should know about. I gave the same answer every time. There's nothing to worry about. The words felt thin in my mouth. I stayed busy on purpose. Paperwork, inventory, routine tasks that required my hands and left my mind just occupied enough not to wander north. It almost worked. Almost. Around mid-morning, one of the deputies mentioned hearing something strange on his radio the night before. He laughed it off as interference, but he kept glancing at me while he talked, like he was checking my reaction. I asked him to describe it. He hesitated. Said it sounded like someone walking. Said it didn't match any pattern he recognized. Said it stopped when he stopped moving. I told him to document it if it happened again. I kept my voice steady. Professional. I didn't tell him I already knew exactly what he meant. By afternoon, the snowfall had lightened, leaving the world muffled and raw. I stood at my office window and watched people move through town, their paths briefly visible before being erased. Every set of footprints felt like a question. Not real. Real. Not real. I don't remember deciding to go back to the lake. I remember being there. The road was worse than before, snow-packed and quiet, the trees bending inward like they were trying to listen. When I reached the turnout, there were already tracks in the fresh snow. Not tires. Footprints. They led from the road straight toward the lake. No hesitation. No wandering. Just a clean line from one place to another. I stood there longer than I should have, engine running, heater blasting, pretending that if I didn't get out of the truck, the decision wouldn't count. The footprints didn't care. They waited. I followed them to the edge. The lake had disappeared under a smooth, untouched layer of snow. No visible ice. No reflections. Just a white expanse that swallowed distance and depth alike. The footprints continued without pause, as if the surface beneath them didn't matter. I knelt and brushed snow aside with my glove. Ice. Solid. Unbroken. The footprints ended 20 yards out. They didn't fade. They stopped. I scanned the surface beyond them. Empty. No signs of struggle. No hole. No break. Just snow and silence and a sense of finality that pressed in on my chest. I took one step onto the lake. The quiet deepened immediately. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like sinking into deep water. The wind fell away. My breath sounded too loud. The world narrowed to the crunch of my boots and the white space ahead. I walked to the end of the footprints and stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sound came again. Not beneath me this time. Around me. Footsteps. Many of them. Soft, careful, moving just beyond the edge of my hearing. I turned slowly, scanning the surface, but there was nothing to see. No movement. No shapes. Just the impression of presence. I whispered without meaning to. "Hello." The sound stopped. The silence that followed felt expectant, like something waiting for me to finish a sentence. I took another step. The ice didn't crack. It flexed. Not enough to break, just enough to let me know it could. Images flooded my mind without warning. Not visions exactly. Memories that weren't mine. People walking. People stopping. People standing where I stood now, listening to the same quiet, feeling the same pull. Paths layered over paths, worn not into the ice, but into something deeper. Not real. Real. Not real. I don't remember turning back. I remember being on shore again, heart racing, lungs burning, snow soaking through my pant legs. I remember looking back and seeing a single new set of footprints beside the others. My own. They didn't lead back to land. They faced inward. I left the lake without looking again. That night, the radio in my bedroom turned on. No static this time. No interference, just clear, unmistakable sound. Footsteps on ice. They moved slowly, deliberately, back and forth, like someone pacing. I lay there, eyes open, counting my breaths, waiting for the sound to fade. It didn't. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke, the radio was off. The room was cold. Frost traced the edges of the window again, thicker than before. On my nightstand sat a folded piece of paper. I don't remember putting it there. It was a copy of my first report. The one from the morning this began. Across the bottom, in handwriting that looked uncomfortably like mine, was a sentence I know I didn't write. "You followed the wrong set." I folded the paper back up and put it in the drawer with the others. I told myself I would stop going to the lake. I told myself this was still just an investigation. I told myself there was time. Outside, fresh snow began to fall again. I stopped keeping track of dates. That's another thing I didn't notice right away. Days still passed. The sun still rose and set. But the numbers on reports started to feel arbitrary, like labels stuck onto something that no longer moved forward in a straight line. I would look at the calendar in my office and feel nothing. No sense of before or after, just a growing pressure, as if time itself was compressing around a single point. The lake. I tried to stay away. I really did. I rerouted patrols. I delegated anything that might take me north. I told myself that avoidance was discipline, not fear. That a sheriff knowing when not to engage was part of the job. The lake didn't care. It began to appear in smaller places, a reflection in the dark screen of my computer. The curved bottom of a coffee mug when I set it down too fast. The smooth, pale surface of paperwork left blank for too long. Every time, I'd blink and it would be gone, leaving behind the uneasy sense that I'd just missed something important. Not real. Real. Not real. People started acting differently around me. They didn't say anything outright. That's not how it happens. Conversations would trail off when I entered a room. Deputies would exchange glances they thought I didn't see. Someone asked if I was getting enough rest. Someone else asked if I wanted them to take over lake-related calls for a while. I said no. I needed to be close to it. I didn't understand why yet. Only that distance made things worse. When I stayed away, the sounds followed me home. When I went near, they stayed contained, like pressure held behind a dam. I began walking at night. Not to the lake at first. Just through town. Through neighborhoods I'd patrolled for years. The snow made every street feel unfamiliar, smoothing out landmarks, erasing the little differences that told you where you were. I followed my own footprints more than once, convinced for a moment that someone else was just ahead of me. Sometimes, I thought I heard someone walking behind me. When I stopped, the sound stopped. When I turned around, there was no one there. The radio logs grew worse. Entire stretches of time were filled with nothing but low, rhythmic noise. Too slow to be static. Too regular to ignore. I started marking the timestamps, drawing lines between them, looking for patterns. They formed paths when I connected them. Not routes you could drive, routes you could walk. All of them ended at the same time of night. All of them pointed north. I dreamed less, but when I did, the dreams were sharper, shorter, always the same. I stood on the ice while snow fell upward, lifting instead of settling. Footprints appeared around me, one by one, stopping just far enough away that I couldn't tell who made them. I never saw faces. I never heard voices. I always woke before anything happened. One evening I found myself at the lake without remembering the drive. The truck was idling. The headlights cut two pale tunnels across the snow-covered surface. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, heart steady, breath even, like this was exactly where I'd planned to be. The footprints were already there. Dozens of them. They came from every direction. From the tree line. From the far shore. Some began in the middle of the lake itself, as if whoever made them had stepped out of nothing and decided to walk from there. All of them faced inward, toward a loose circle near the center. Toward an empty space. I stepped out of the truck. The cold bit deeper than usual, sharp enough to feel deliberate. The lake accepted my weight without complaint. I moved slowly, counting steps, keeping my breathing measured. The footprints around me felt close now, not in distance, but in attention. I reached the edge of the circle and stopped. The quiet closed in. For the first time since this began, I felt something like recognition. Not mine. The lake's. A sense of familiarity that made my skin prickle. Like I'd returned to a place I'd been expected. I thought of the retired deputy's words. About paths. About writing things down. About listening with the part of you that remembers where you've walked. I realized then that the lake wasn't showing me something new. It was reminding me. Images surfaced, uninvited. Moments from my career I'd filed away and never reopened. A call I'd cleared too quickly. A set of tracks I'd dismissed as animal. A body never found. A report closed on assumption rather than certainty. Paths I'd helped erase. Not real. Real. Not real. The footprints around me began to soften, edges blurring as snow drifted in. Only mine stayed sharp. I took one step forward. The ice flexed again. Deeper this time. A slow, heavy movement that traveled outward in a wide circle. The sound it made wasn't threatening. It was welcoming. I felt the pull then. Not physical. Not a force you could resist by digging in your heels. It was the pull of completion. Of finishing something that had been waiting a long time to be finished. I don't remember leaving the lake that night. I remember waking up at my desk. The office dark. The radio humming quietly beside me. My boots were dry. My coat hung neatly on its hook. Everything looked normal. On my desk lay a fresh report. No date. No case number. Just a single line, written in my handwriting. Subject arrived on foot. I stared at it until the words stopped making sense. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and steady, erasing the town one layer at a time. I tried to destroy the report. That feels important to say plainly. I didn't hide it. I didn't lock it away. I didn't pretend it wasn't there. I took it home with the intention of ending it. Paper burns. Ink runs. Records can be erased if you're willing to do the work. I fed the page into my fireplace that night and watched the edges curl. The flame caught quickly, bright and clean. For a moment, I felt something like relief. Then the fire went out. Not smoldered, not faded. It went out as if it had never been burning at all. The room filled with the smell of cold ash. I reached into the hearth and pulled the page back out. It was intact. No scorch marks, no heat. The paper was cold to the touch, like it had been waiting somewhere else and only just returned. Not real. Real, not real. That's when I understood this wasn't about evidence anymore. It wasn't about reports, or procedure, or even the lake itself. It was about continuity. About making sure the path didn't end too early. I stopped resisting after that. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It happened in small concessions. I stopped correcting the radio logs when they changed. I stopped questioning why some nights I woke with snow in the cuffs of my pants. I stopped asking myself how long I'd been standing still when I found my reflection frozen in dark glass. The town noticed before I did. People avoided me now. Conversations stopped outright when I entered rooms. One woman crossed the street rather than pass me on the sidewalk. A child stared at me from a car window, eyes wide and unblinking, until his mother gently turned his head away. I heard rumors that I was sick, that I'd seen something I shouldn't have, that the lake had gotten into me. None of them were wrong. The radio spoke more often now. Not always in sound, sometimes in absence. Dead air that stretched too long, heavy with expectation. When sound returned, it was always the same. Footsteps. Closer than before. One night I followed them. I don't remember putting on my coat. I don't remember unlocking the door. I remember standing at the edge of the lake as if I'd been there for hours. Snow dusting my shoulders, the world reduced to white and shadow. The footprints were waiting. Only one set this time. They began at my feet and led forward. I didn't hesitate. The ice felt different now. Not colder. Not weaker. Familiar, like ground I'd walked 1,000 times in dreams and memories that weren't entirely mine. Each step felt predetermined, placed before I arrived to fill it. Halfway out I stopped. The quiet was absolute. I realized then that I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear requires uncertainty. This felt inevitable. The last step in a process that had started long before I knew to pay attention. I looked back. There were no footprints behind me. I looked forward. The path ended a few steps ahead, dissolving into smooth, untouched snow. I understood what the message on the report had meant. You followed the wrong set. This was the right one. I stood there for a long time, listening to the ice breathe beneath me, feeling the weight of all the paths layered under my boots. I thought of the people who'd walked here before. The ones who'd vanished cleanly enough that the town could forget them. The ones who'd become part of the quiet. I took another step. The lake didn't break. It accepted. The sensation wasn't falling. It wasn't drowning. It was release, a slipping sideways, like stepping out of alignment with the world. The cold vanished. The sound vanished. Even the idea of direction faded. For a moment I felt everything at once. Every path. Every step, every person who had stood where I stood, listening for something they couldn't name. Then even that began to thin. I don't know how much time passed. I don't know where I am now. I know the town still needs a sheriff. I know reports still get filed. I know footsteps still appear on the lake after fresh snowfall. Sometimes I hear my voice on the radio, calm and professional, explaining procedures I no longer remember learning. Sometimes, I catch a glimpse of myself in a window and feel the strange relief of recognition without ownership. Not real. Real. Not real. If this record exists, it's because the path hasn't finished being walked yet. Someone will read it. Someone will listen. Someone will stand at the edge of the ice and feel the quiet deepen. The lake is patient. It always has been. I don't know when this stops being a record and starts being something else. The pages don't feel like pages anymore. They feel thin. Temporary. Like frost on glass that will vanish the moment someone breathes too close. I keep writing because stopping feels worse. Because silence has a way of filling itself when you leave it alone. If you're reading this, then I didn't finish what I thought I was finishing. Or maybe I did. The office is quiet tonight. Too quiet. Even for winter. The kind of quiet that settles into corners and waits. The lights hum faintly overhead, steady and indifferent. The radio is on, volume low. Not because I expect a call, but because turning it off feels like closing my eyes. Outside, snow is falling again. I can see it through the window, drifting down in slow, careful sheets. The streetlights turn it into a curtain of white lines, each one a brief path that exists only long enough to disappear. By morning, the town will look untouched. Clean. Innocent. It always does. I don't remember driving here tonight. I don't remember unlocking the door. I remember sitting at my desk and realizing I was already holding the pen. The ink flows easily. Too easily. Like these words have been waiting longer than I have. Not real. Real. Not real. The lake isn't visible from here, but I don't need to see it to know where it is. North. Always north. A presence rather than a location. A certainty rather than a place. I feel it the way you feel your own name being spoken in another room. The radio crackles. Not static this time, just the faint suggestion of movement. A rhythm I recognize without thinking. Footsteps on ice. Slow. Measured. Patient. They stop. I wait. Nothing follows. No voice. No call sign. No explanation. Just the knowledge that whatever was walking has reached the end of something. I check the logbook. There are entries I don't remember writing. Routine patrol notes. Weather updates. A missing person report already marked resolved. The handwriting is mine. The tone is calm. Professional. Convincing. There's a map pinned to the corkboard beside my desk. Stillwater County, Minnesota. Lakes scattered across it like dark thoughts. I stand and study it, tracing familiar roads with my eyes. My gaze keeps drifting to the same blue shape near the top. The lake doesn't have a name on the map anymore. I'm sure it used to. I try to remember the old one. The one people stopped saying out loud. The word slips away every time I reach for it, like a thought you're not allowed to finish. All I'm left with is the feeling behind it. Paths. I think about all the footprints that have appeared there over the years. How fresh they always look. How calm. How certain. I think about how many people must have stood at the edge of that ice, listening to the quiet deepen, telling themselves the same things I did. Just a lake. Just winter. Just another step. Not real. Real. Not real. The pen pauses in my hand. For a moment, I'm not sure where I am. The office feels slightly out of alignment, like a photograph hung crooked on the wall. I blink, and it settles. Or maybe I do. There's moisture on the floor near the door. I don't look at it right away. I know what it will be. Knowing doesn't make it easier. It just removes the last excuse for surprise. Footprints, they lead inward this time. From the hallway to the middle of the room. They stop a few feet from my desk, as if whoever made them understood the importance of leaving space. They're my size. I don't feel fear when I see them. I feel recognition. A quiet, almost relieved sense of alignment. Like something that's been slightly off has finally corrected itself. The radio clicks once. Clear. Sharp. Dispatch, it says. Calm. Familiar. My voice. Reporting footprints on the lake. I don't answer. I stand slowly and walk around the desk. My boots leave marks on the floor beside the wet prints. Solid, certain. For now. I follow them to where they stop and stand there, listening. The office feels thinner here, like the walls are suggestions rather than barriers. I can hear the lake without sound now. I can feel the ice under my feet without standing on it. The path is close. I think about whoever will find this. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe years from now. Tucked into a drawer that no one opens unless they have to. Maybe you're listening somewhere far from here, thinking this is just a story. Just a voice filling the quiet. I hope it stays that way for you. The snow outside falls heavier. I can almost see the footprints forming even now, out on the lake, waiting for the morning light to make them visible. Someone will see them. Someone will wonder. Someone will follow. The lake doesn't need everyone. It never has. It just needs the path to continue. The radio hum deepens, then softens, like something stepping away. I stop writing. Not because I'm finished, because I don't need to write the next part down. It already knows how it goes.